You think you know what happens behind the pristine fences and quiet streets of your neighborhood, but think again. Beneath the manicured lawns and polite smiles lies a story that will shake your trust in the very idea of community. When a decorated officer, respected for his service and sacrifice, moves into what should have been a welcoming place, he's instead met with hostility disguised as rules. What unfolds isn't just a clash over regulations. It's a chilling revelation of how prejudice hides in plain sight, and how power can be twisted in the most unexpected corners of our lives. Officer James Carter had built his life on discipline, sacrifice, and honor. Years of service in the military and later as a police officer had earned him medals, commendations, and the quiet respect of his peers. To his neighbors, he was just another man moving into a new home. But to those who knew his story, he was a decorated veteran who had given much of himself to protect others. When James and his family settled into their new suburban community, it felt like a fresh chapter. The streets were lined with children playing, couples jogging, and neighbors waving as they passed. Their home was modest but beautiful, a place where James hoped his family could finally find peace after years of constant relocations and duty calls. For once, he thought, life would be simple. At first glance, everything seemed perfect. The neighborhood boasted clean sidewalks, a community pool, and an HOA board that prided itself on maintaining order. Rules were strict but fair, or so James believed. He paid his dues, kept his lawn trimmed, and made sure his home looked just like the others. On the surface, he was doing everything right, but James began to notice the subtle looks. Conversations would fall silent when he approached. Letters from the HOA seemed to arrive more frequently at his door than at his neighbors. While others decorated freely, James was warned about minor infractions no one else seemed to face. He brushed it off at first, unwilling to see a pattern where there might be none. What James didn't realize was that the very community he had hoped would offer safety and belonging was preparing to show him a side of prejudice he thought he had left behind long ago. It didn't take long before the cracks in the neighborhood's facade began to widen. James received his first official HOA notice over something as trivial as the shade of paint on his front door. The letter claimed it clashed with the uniform aesthetic of the community. But as James walked the block, he counted at least half a dozen homes with brighter, even clashing colors. None of them had warning slips pinned to their doors. Soon after came another notice. This time, the HOA claimed his lawn ornaments, simple garden lights his daughter had picked out, were unsightly and against regulations. He removed them, reluctantly, but he noticed other families displaying fountains, flags, and elaborate decorations without consequence. The pattern was impossible to ignore. James tried to reason with the HOA, politely asking for clarification, but each time his concerns were dismissed. Meetings were held without his knowledge, and complaints were lodged about his home that seemed designed to stack a case against him. It felt less like rule enforcement and more like targeted harassment. Behind the closed doors of the boardroom, whispers circulated that James didn't fit in, though no one ever said it outright. He noticed the tight smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the way neighbors waved but then crossed the street when they saw him coming. His family felt the chill too. His wife's invitations to neighborhood gatherings went unanswered, and his daughter's playdates quietly disappeared. The final straw came when James proudly displayed an American flag outside his home for Memorial Day, honoring the very country he had risked his life to protect. Within 24 hours, the HOA issued a violation notice claiming the flagpole was unauthorized. Yet, just around the corner, 3 other homes flew their flags undisturbed. Each notice chipped away at James's sense of belonging. He had faced combat zones, dangerous streets, and life-threatening missions, but nothing prepared him for the suffocating weight of being treated as an outsider in his own home. The quiet hostility grew louder with each passing week. What began as subtle unfairness was now a systematic attempt to push him out. As the letters piled up and fines mounted, James realized this was no misunderstanding. This was something darker. The rules weren't being enforced equally. They were being wielded as weapons. And just when he thought things couldn't get worse, a letter arrived that carried a far more devastating threat, one that could strip him of the very home he had worked so hard to provide for his family. The letter arrived like a gut punch. A formal notice from the HOA demanding that James remove all unauthorized modifications within 30 days, or face legal action that could result in foreclosure. In plain words, they were threatening to take his home. The place he had poured his savings into, the haven he promised his family, now dangled at the mercy of a biased board. James held the paper in his hands, the words blurring as anger mixed with disbelief. He had faced bullets and explosions in foreign lands, but nothing compared to the helpless fury of being targeted for something he could not change. His service, his medals, his sacrifices meant nothing here. In the eyes of the HOA, he wasn't a decorated officer. He was a man they wanted gone. Neighbors who once waved at him now avoided his gaze. Some whispered he was difficult or not a good fit. James could feel the isolation pressing in, suffocating him. His wife watched with quiet worry as he sat at the kitchen table night after night, surrounded by letters and fines, the weight of injustice growing heavier by the day. It wasn't just about property anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to exist without being pushed out. Every fiber of James's being screamed against the injustice, but the system seemed stacked against him. The moment he realized the fight had escalated beyond simple warnings came when he found an anonymous note shoved into his mailbox. "Leave before we make you leave." The HOA had crossed a line. This wasn't about rules anymore, it was about power. P. James refused to be silenced. Instead of backing down, he sought legal counsel and brought every letter, every fine, and every double standard into the light. The decorated officer who had spent his life defending others now found himself fighting for his own family's right to simply exist in peace. When his story reached the courtroom, the cracks in the HOA's arguments became impossible to ignore. Photos of other homes with the same so-called violations revealed what James already knew. Rules were not being applied equally. The foreclosure threat was dismissed, and the HOA was forced to retreat under the weight of their own prejudice exposed. But victory came with scars. The neighborhood never truly welcomed James, and though his family kept their home, they carried the heavy knowledge that bias can thrive in places that claim fairness. What shook James the most wasn't the paperwork or the fines. It was the realization that the same courage he showed in combat was required here, in a quiet suburban street, against people who hid their prejudice behind smiles and regulations. This story isn't just about one man's fight with an HOA. It's a reflection of the silent battles fought by countless others, where discrimination doesn't announce itself loudly but chips away quietly, rule by rule, until belonging feels impossible. So ask yourself, if someone who risked everything for his country can still be treated as an outsider in his own community, what does that say about the rest of us? Prejudice doesn't need uniforms or banners. It can hide behind bylaws, policies, and polite words. The question is, will we continue to look away, or will we finally stand against it when it appears on our own doorstep?